This video is sponsored by Squarespace. Infinity is a miniatures game that I don't know much about, but I've always admired from a distance. So when the makers of Infinity, Corvus Belli, reached out to me and offered to send me an Infinity-related package in the mail, of course I said yes. So today, we're going to unbox what they sent me, give you my thoughts on what's inside, as well as painting up some of my very first miniatures from Infinity, the miniatures game. As I opened the box, I found 3 smaller boxes inside, along with a piece of paper explaining what I was holding. So apparently this is their event-exclusive bundle for Adepticon. I had to do some reading to understand what I was holding, but basically this is the starter set for a brand new Infinity sub-faction called Torchlight. It comes with an event-exclusive Bounty Hunter miniature, which appears to be just for Adepticon attendees or people who buy it online during the course of Adepticon. So thank you very much, Corvus Belli. This is a very cool set that you've sent me, and I'm definitely at least intrigued enough to assemble these. Maybe we'll paint a few. Inside the individual boxes, I found several highly detailed metal models, but there were also a few components made of Ceocast. So that's pretty cool. I haven't seen many companies using Ceocast yet, but overall, yeah, there were some pretty cool models in here, and a few I definitely felt like painting, so I started to assemble them. Metal models in general can be a bit of a pain to assemble, but these ones weren't too bad. They required a little bit of patience on my part to put together, but I was able to do it all with just my clippers, my hobby knife, and some super glue. Nothing here required any pinning, which was a huge relief, honestly. The one big robot included definitely would have required pinning, but they have thankfully and thoughtfully made this big model out of Ceocast instead of metal, so it actually went together very easily. Once I had a few of the models together, I started thinking to myself, these are pretty cool. Why haven't I investigated Infinity before now? They're really different than any models that I've seen before and have a really unique style. I'm used to miniatures being at least a little bit caricatured in their proportions, but these ones are very realistic compared to what I'm used to. I like that they have their own unique style, but they're also generic enough that I could see myself using these in any sci-fi or cyberpunk setting that I might want to run games in. Don't get me wrong, I love specific sci-fi settings, but the problem with settings like Star Wars or 40K is when I paint miniatures for those, I'm painting miniatures pretty much exclusively for those settings. They have really distinctive looking styles, distinctive looking armor and clothing. Whereas one of the things I like about these Infinity models that they've sent me is that these could be used as background characters in pretty much any sci-fi RPG or tabletop game that I might want to play and not stick out to me as being from a unique IP. So I really like that. It makes them feel a lot more like something I could easily personalize for my own stories or my own settings. It's also cool that there's not a lot of repeats here. There are a few characters in a similar uniform, but at the same time, they all feel like unique characters. Infinity is more of a skirmish level game where you might field 10 to 15 characters, so it's cool that each one of these looks unique. I enjoy painting for games like Warcry or Kill Team. I actually played my first game of Kill Team last week. It was actually very fun and I would like to play it more. And one of the cool things about those two games is you can take your warbands and then field them as single units in larger games of Age of Sigmar or 40K respectively. However, because of that, I sometimes find that the figures for those games' warbands do tend to be pretty uniform, and it's almost always about 10 guys that look like a 40K or AOS unit rather than being unique characters. Whereas with a game like Infinity, each figure really does feel more like its own individual character, its own individual toy. And from what I can tell, a lot of these can be used in multiple different factions, so it's much more like you're painting up a variety of action figures which can then be combined in different ways, and I really like that. But you know what else is kind of like a fun toy that can be combined in a number of different ways, and I really like that? That's right, it's this video's sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one website and hosting platform that I have been using for over a decade now for all of my website needs. And it's super easy to use. You just pick from one of their fantastically designed pre-made templates, add in any extra pages you might want, and then customize things to your heart's content using their extremely intuitive drag and drop grid system. Personally, I've been using my own Squarespace website for all kinds of fun things, like a gallery of my painted miniatures, all of my painting reference documents, as well as an online store. So if you need a website, why not check out squarespace.com today for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Dana Howl for 10% off your very first purchase of a website or domain. Once I had a few of these miniatures assembled and ready to paint, I decided to first base them before priming them, using a variety of sci-fi related basing materials, such as the textured foil packaging from my antidepressant pills, floral wire, barbecue skewers, and other random plastic bits. With this complete, I gave the models a zenithal prime with my airbrush, starting with a black prime, followed up by a transparent green midtone, and finishing up with a white overspray. And while I'm doing this, you might be thinking, why a green midtone? Are these secretly Skaven in disguise? Well, yes, but also no. The reason that I've decided to paint up my Torchlight figures in a green color scheme is not to celebrate the coming of our new vermin overlords, not to celebrate the coming of the spring season, but instead because after researching some of the deep lore of this faction, I have realized that they are both in space, as well as being a peacekeeping force, or police, if you will. So when I think of police, and I think of space, I think of space police. Specifically, Space Police 2, the LEGO theme from the 1990s. Who have this really cool color scheme of dark green with lots of black, white, gray, and an accent color of red. I thought this would be a fun way to paint up these models, so I went for it. And after our zenithal, I gave these models an overspray of striking scorpion green to get started, followed up by shading the model from below and on its base with Talisar blue. And yes, I know technically this cerulean blue color is not a part of the Space Police color scheme, but just look how cool this blue gradient looks in the Space Police ads from the 1990s, and I dare you to tell me this isn't a part of the official Space Police 2 color scheme. I dare you. Once this was done, I took my airbrush and went back in to highlight any areas that I wanted to eventually be white armor, at which point I realized this doesn't really look like Space Police anymore. Who am I kidding? The real color scheme that we're doing here is Explorians, another LEGO theme from the 1990s, such an iconic sci-fi color scheme. We love to do a lime green and bright blue gradient with bold black and white sci-fi armor elements whenever possible. So I leaned into this, and to get the high contrast black and white armor that I was looking for, I broke out my noosh at this step to do some shading. And if you haven't been watching the last two videos on the channel, you might not be aware of what noosh is, but I've recently started using this cool new product called Noosh from Monument Hobbies, which is marketed as a non-toxic oil wash alternative. Here's how it works. Pick your desired shading color, add 2 to 3 parts noosh, mix it together, and then slather that onto your model. After giving it a minute or two to dry, you can then wipe off all the excess using a makeup sponge, damp brush, or Q-tip. And this is going to shade all of the recesses for you without affecting the other areas. This works pretty well, but I recommend applying a coat of varnish to the model before you use your noosh. I did use a varnish on this model, but I didn't use varnish the last time I used Noosh, and it didn't go so well. Some of the paint ended up rubbing off of the previous coat. So make sure to varnish your model before you use Noosh, and you'll be just fine. Anyway, with our main colors and shadows in place, I thought I would add some highlights back onto the model, starting out by highlighting some of the white armor areas with one of my favorite new pale blue colors from the Army Painter, Marine Mist. And after spending a long time on that, I added back in some targeted areas of Talisar blue, both to add some variety and bright blue highlights to places, but also for shading on a lot of the white armor areas. I think that looks quite dynamic and cool. After this, I painted the very small areas of flesh on our models. So I took 2 different skin tones and mixed each one with lime green, and basically just used this to fill in the flesh areas on the models' faces. After this, I did some quick cleanup on all of the models. I blocked in some areas with black, other areas with blue, where I thought that we just needed more distinct colors for whatever reason. And once this was done, I added further highlights to the white armor with a brighter white titanium color, mostly applying the technique of edge highlighting just to capture the most raised areas and highlights. Next up, I did the same thing with lime green, edge highlighting some of the blue areas as well as any other areas I wanted to be highlighted with a bright lime green glow or have subtle green light sources bouncing off them. And looking back at this point at our Explorians reference art, I realized that the Explorians scheme actually incorporates a very few bright red highlights. So I took a look at each model and just chose 1 or 2 elements on each one to pick out with a bright red detail. Finally, just to smooth out all of the blends, I took some lime green in my airbrush once again and added pops of green to anywhere I thought could use a little bit of subtle blending or more lime green highlights. And that's pretty much it. What do you think of my first squad of Explorians? I mean, O12 Torchlight models from Infinity. I had a lot of fun painting these, and I'll definitely be painting more Infinity models in the future. I've heard the game that goes along with these minis is quite fun as well, so I hope to try out that game in the future. But for now, I could see myself using these for other games such as Stargrave or Space Station Zero. Thank you so much to Corvus Belly for sending me over these models. Thank you to all of our wonderful, generous patrons for the constant support over on Patreon. I really appreciate it a lot. And I will see you in the next video.